Hey everyone, and welcome to my close look at an old game that received a middling welcome upon its arrival. A game that joined a fan base in its disdain for its ability to take many core aspects of its initial horror roots and go almost full-on action. A game that, had it been something else entirely, might have gotten a better overall greeting. That's right. Today, we're going to talk about let's face it, Dead Space isn't going to win any awards for its storytelling or fleshed out characters or an exhilarating story, but it has done well enough to build a world that can keep you interested from the beginning to the end of the game. And at this point in Dead Space's story, EarthGov and the Unitology factions create the main conflict of the game. Both sides have shown that they would do whatever it takes to get their objectives done, even if it means hurting people, exclusively Isaac, compared to what happened in 1 and 2, and now in 3, furthering those ambitions and also the way in which they attain their goals. The endgame for the factions being EarthGov wants to weaponize whatever the markers are doing to people, and the Unitologists believe this is our next step in evolution, and we shouldn't fight it, but embrace the change. With Isaac being the only person in the universe so far to destroy markers, he has become the main person of interest for both of these factions. Even though this could be pretty much the entire basis for the game, the people who made it decided that's really not good enough. They decided there needs to be a love triangle between Isaac and the previous game's love interest and life-saving plot device, Ellie. This particular relationship thing doesn't work out, mainly because most of the stuff that happened off screen. So by the time that we get to them in Dead Space 3, all we see is Isaac and Ellie just no longer a couple. Since we can't see what happened between them, there's really no way for us to connect to it. And even her new love with Mr. Robert Norton, it doesn't really do anything outside of give us a bully for Isaac to have, just a regular antagonist. But this whole thing ends up being the main driving point for Isaac, being that he wants to reconnect with her even though she's technically moved on. The whole love triangle thing is strictly by the books, so nothing surprising really happens, and of course, a very satisfying part where, spoilers, you shoot Mr. Norton, which is actually really satisfying because the setup to it was pretty good for the payoff. The other large story point that they added in was that this game decided to go co-op, and you get this new partner named John Carver. And John's whole story is, I wouldn't say brand new, but it is at least interesting, being that his is entirely about his family and how he feels that he failed as a father, even though he was trying to do what he viewed as the right thing. The main reason why this doesn't really help much in the story is that if you play solo, John is completely relegated to cutscenes only. All of his story building only works in co-op if you have another partner playing the game with you, and if you go and seek out the special rooms that you can only access if you have a co-op partner. And if you do get a partner to play this game with you, those sections are actually very interesting because you get to see how things are happening through John's eyes, especially if you're the partner taking over John's character. The way the marker messes with his head is actually really interesting and very similar to what happened to Isaac in the first and the second one. But therein lies the problem, in that Dead Space for 1 and 2 was a single player experience tailored to just you going through the game. Since the requirement to play John needs for you to have another player playing Isaac so that you could play John's part, you will miss out the entirety of his story if you don't have someone else to play with, which is really sad because I would have rathered them do something maybe more along the lines of Resident Evil 5, to where you could choose Chris or Sheva. Why couldn't you just choose John or Isaac? It really wouldn't have changed the game in any meaningful way. And then when you play the game singular, like you're supposed to with Isaac, John just literally disappears. He'll show up behind you for 2 seconds, and then once the cutscene's over, he jumps to the checkpoint that he's supposed to be automatically. It completely breaks the game, and you have no attachment to him unless you're playing him. It's a bummer because they could have had an A-B scenario type thing to where when you play as John, you're doing all these extra things to help Isaac get to his objective. And just in the end, you could completely rip John out of the game and it would be no worse for it. Now, if story was never your thing, the other thing that Dead Space did really well was combat. The dismemberment system from the first and second game follow through into this one. It's where you don't simply kill enemies just by shooting them in the head. You have to take off their limbs. That's where you get your big damage. And if you cut off a bladed arm, you can pick it up with your kinesis module and send it back to them for big damage. This is actually the preferred way to fight for most of the game, being that it helps you conserve ammo, and they've really cranked up the damage for the kinesis module. Many enemies from the previous installments make their return for this game, with of course some brand new ones since we're in an entirely new environment. One of the new enemies is a human body who hasn't completely turned necromorph, but they can wield weapons. So sometimes they'll have pickaxes, or later in the game they may still have a gun that they never let go of. And this is nice as it adds some new enemy types to change the landscape of your tactical gameplay, being that now the monsters don't have to just run at you, they can try to pick you off from afar. But with that being said, most of the game is still just like the last two, in which monsters have to get in close and grab you with their bladed arms, or they may have a acid projectile they can spit at you. The enemy groupings in 3 are, well, compared to 1 and 2, completely clustered. The necromorphs in general in this game are much faster, but Isaac has not really done a lot of cardio since the time of 2, and he just does not move well enough to make it out of many encounters unscathed. He has gotten a new dodge roll mechanic, but the problem is, and maybe it's just I'm not that good with it, but I couldn't use it effectively enough, and I took so many hits. And the enemies can move so fast and get behind you very quickly that it's almost impossible to get out of encounters without getting hit at least once or twice. But even with the new necromorphs moving in their new ways, the newest enemy they added to this game really soured it, especially for me.
Okay.
Once you encounter humans in the game as a main enemy type, the game no longer becomes about dismemberment and tactical gameplay. It essentially boils down to a very bad Gears of War clone in which you can't take cover, and even though the enemy knows how to use cover correctly, they constantly leave their heads wide open for perfect headshots. It's the same in the sections that have the snipers with rocket launchers. Even though, yes, the rocket launchers can kill you in pretty much one hit, they are standing wide open, so it's easy to find them using their laser sights and just taking their heads off. And since they're humans, that's all you have to do. They don't need to be dismembered. You just have to shoot them in the head and they go down quickly. But even then, the necromorphs themselves have become very rush heavy. They're no longer trying to get behind you and use vents to move in and out or try to circle around you. Once they pop out, they are beelining straight for you. Even at times when there's unitologists that shoot them, they'll ignore the unitologist completely and run directly at you. And even when you're fighting enemy types from the older games, sometimes their AI just doesn't know how to function. The hammerhead enemies have an invisible line that they can't cross, and if Isaac goes past it, they just completely drop aggression and go back to their starting points. It really breaks how the game works, and it ruins these situations in which you think you have nowhere to run, but now all of a sudden you get this free pass. And you can abuse it for not just those types of enemies, but there's some other enemies that they can't really find their way around rooms well. So it's a mixed bag of, they give you too much to handle in very bad points, and then other times the game just can't handle what it's trying to do on its own. And depending on the grouping of necromorphs, this could be extremely frustrating, because if they send anything more than 2 or 3, it becomes really hard to manage, even if you have the best gun with the stasis bullets. And then to add to this, the new weapon system, though fun, and it does allow for creativity to let you try to build a gun that would suit your playstyle, ends up funneling down to really just one gun that can handle all the situations. And it really stinks because there are some fun combinations you can make, like a flamethrower that also does stasis damage that picks up ammo automatically. It was really interesting to do some of these things, but in the end, the only thing that you really need is one gun with a long range top attachment, and then on the bottom something that can push enemies away, because they are going to get into your space. And you will find this out quickly, because miniguns that you may have fun with at the beginning will become almost completely useless later in the game when you have to deal with the many hordes of enemies they send your way. On top of that, resources have been adjusted to where now there's one universal ammo type, and you pick up other things to make med packs. You'll still find some on the ground, but for the most part, you can find other materials to just make med packs on your own. And even on the harder difficulties, these resources are pretty easy to find, and they give you a lot. So the tension of trying to get to that next fight, or trying to scrounge enough ammo or conserve whatever you need, it doesn't really hit that hard anymore, because now you can just find what you need laying on the ground. And to further that, you now get these little helper robots that you can send out and scavenge for you. These things now turn the game into one big scavenger hunt as you roam around waiting until you hear the little call sound to drop one on the ground. After that, you just play the game normal until you get the indicator that says, hey, the bot's waiting at the bench. And then you go pick up your resources. It almost discourages some exploration. It doesn't give you everything you need. Of course, if you explored, you would get more things, but it really just kind of takes away from that feeling of helplessness. Your suits don't really do much in this game either. Once you get the Arctic suit so that you can survive out in the cold, pretty much everything is gifted to you, and they don't really change much in terms of like capacity. You don't have to work too hard to get the suits. They're mostly just part of the game as you come across them. You'll get some extra slots here and there, but outside of a completely aesthetic look, they don't really change the gameplay. The terminal puzzles from Dead Space 2, where you have to hack the terminal, have come back, and then they've added in some new puzzles, but the problem is these puzzles are just tedious. They don't really add anything to the game. When you come across them, the answer is very straightforward. There's not a lot of guesswork to them, so in all truth, they could have been left out, but I do understand as they're trying to showcase Isaac as an engineer. But if this is engineering, then I should be changing jobs right now. The next thing would be the boss fights. Now, the boss fights aren't inherently bad, but they are very formulaic. And the bosses have big glowy bits, so of course, you have to shoot the big glowy bits. Now, there are a few that involve environmental machines, like harpooning one of the bosses to rip it apart, which is very cool, but in the end, the boss fight still revolves around kite the boss, shoot the glowy bit, activate the trap, repeat until a boss finally gives up. And it's not necessarily bad gameplay, it's just formulaic and something that you can get in many other games. Now that I've put most of my grievances out with the game, I want to talk about the things that I like the most. And first off, I want to start with the visuals. This game is still beautiful even now. The lighting, the art direction on all of the monsters in the game. I mean, the suits also look good, even though it's just, dressing on top of Isaac. The whole thing just looks very well done, and the team really showed that they still have a mastery over making great environments and producing a game that even years later can still look fantastic. The set pieces they created for this game are also really good. I especially like the one that you have Isaac being lowered into a giant necromorph's body that's supposedly dead, but of course, they never truly die. And once he gets inside, he starts a sequence in which he has to pop these little pus bubbles in the body, but in doing so, it unleashes more of the small enemies, and you just have to run around and kite the enemies while you're trying to search for the right pus bubble so that the scientist can get enough information. Even the final boss fight, which is, I wouldn't say that it's super engaging, but just the fact that you're flying around on these pieces and the giant boss is, once again spoilers, a giant moon that cracks open to a big tentacle monster, and you're jumping from rock to rock trying to get to the sweet spot so you can launch markers at the eye and kill this thing. It's not difficult in terms of gameplay, but the visual aspect of the game is still just highly fantastic. The next thing I want to talk about is a move that's been in the game since the beginning that doesn't have a lot of applications combat-wise, because it is very situational, but it's just so oh man, just look at this. To some people, it may just seem like a silly little move, but in these games, of course, it lets you get extra resources from bodies. But just the visceral joy of stomping these bodies out, it's not just something to give the player. It's also part of the gameplay so that you're making sure that the bodies can't be reanimated. But man, sometimes when you're just frustrated and you need to get something out, you just let loose on one of these corpses, and it really helps out. I also have to give props to the UI. Ever since the first one, where your entire UI is basically on the back of Isaac, it still works even today. And when you pull the guns up, it shows you how many shots are in the gun through a digital reading on the top. So those things that have been prevalent since the first one are still here, and they still look and work fantastically in these types of games. Even though this one is the least scary of the three, there are still moments in the game that really ramp up the tension and can still scare you.
Nope.
The necromorphs can still be very intimidating, even though in this game you have more than enough ammo and firepower to take them out. But there are moments in the game that they can truly shock you and put you in tense situations. So overall, for me, Dead Space 3 comes out as a entertaining, fun, but very flawed game. It's easy to see parts of the game where the team had their full control, and then the other places where their corporate overlords had to step in and try to turn this into some kind of money-making machine. Terrible microtransactions, along with a DLC, which if I were to recommend this game to anyone, I would say just play the game. Don't worry about the DLC. In my opinion, it ruins the actual ending. All in all, I really think this game is worth the time of anyone, especially nowadays. It goes on sale for so cheap, but I can't really recommend it to anyone who's looking for a solid, scary horror game, especially who wants a survival horror in the vein of maybe RE2 Remake. And really, who wants to put Origin on their computer anymore? It's a terrible launcher. EA, stop it. Origin needs to just go away. Stop it. Leave it alone. No one wants it. It's bad. Just go, get it out of here. Go away. Leave it. And with that, those are my thoughts on Dead Space 3. If you have anything you'd like to add, or maybe you disagree, or you think that I missed anything, which of course I probably did, just leave a comment and let me know. If you've made it this far into the video, thanks so much. I appreciate it. I want to try making more content like this. These are things that I'm passionate about and that I like talking about with other people. So if you want to see more, please like and subscribe, or if not, just watching it is good enough. Thanks so much for your time, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Later.